Welcome to Lab Assignment 7. Today we're going to be doing Factorial ANOVAs in SPSS. So we're going to do SPSS Application 1 together, and then you're going to do Application 2 on your own. And there's only 2 for this lab assignment. So let's begin by reading the word problem. Number 1 says, psychologists have identified 20 clients, 10 women and 10 men, and divided them into groups of 5 to determine the effect of matching the gender of the client and the gender of the therapist on the number of activities of daily living performed by depressed clients. The results are indicated in the table below. So here I see all the clients, there's 20 of them, and then they're broken down by their gender. So the first half are women, second half are men, and then the therapists that they were assigned to. So half of the therapists that they were assigned to are women and half are men. And then for each client, we see the number of activities in the last column of the row that they are on. Okay, so 1A asks us to identify one of the independent variables. So the first independent variable is going to be the gender of the client. So I actually already wrote that. I just put it in white. Getting smarter. Okay. And then identify the other independent variable, and that's going to be the gender of the therapist. And then the dependent variable is the variable that we're measuring. And so the data that we're collecting and putting on our clipboard. So in that case, it's the number of activities of daily living, which I just am going to make the dependent variable as ADL. There we go. And then number 2 asks us to state the null hypothesis. So the word problem here says that the researchers wanted to determine the effect of matching the gender of the client and the gender of the therapist on the number of activities of daily living, or ADL, performed by these depressed clients. So in other words, they kind of want to measure depression using the number of activities of daily living being performed. And then they're saying that that number is going to depend on the gender of the client and the gender of the therapist. So I would write the null hypothesis as there is no significant difference. There's no significant difference on depression. And then I'm just going to write measured by ADL, number of activities of daily living. So there's no significant difference on depression depending on the gender of the therapist and the gender of the client. So what I've included here in my null hypothesis is that there is no, to represent the null hypothesis, there is no significant difference on, and that's where I'm going to put my DV, or my dependent variable, which here we have as depression measured by number of activities of daily living. So there's no significant difference on depression depending on, and then I'm going to put my 2 IVs, so on the gender of the therapist and the gender of the client. Okay, so step 3 is to use SPSS to test all the main and interaction effects. So we're going to see the number of activities of daily living based on the gender of the client, based on the gender of the therapist, and based on the interaction of these 2 IVs together, the client and the therapist, on the number of activities of daily living. So in order to do that in SPSS, we're going to have to first enter in all this data. And so the way we're going to do that is going to involve coding, because we can't put words into SPSS. So when the gender of the client is woman, we're going to label that as 1. And when the gender of the client is a man, we're going to label that as 2. And then for the therapist, we're going to do women here as 3 and man as 4, just so we have a clear delineation. Those codes are arbitrary. They're just codes, so the woman could be coded 52 and the man could be coded 107. It makes no difference. But at any rate, let's get to entering this data. So I'm going to click on variable view here. And then I am going to name my first variable gender client, and I'm going to label it client. And then I'm going to name my second variable therapist, so gender therapist. And then I'm going to label it just therapist. Okay, so I have my two IVs in there, and now I'm going to put my DV, which is number of activities of daily living. So I'm just going to put activities, and then my label is going to be ADL. All right, so I have all of those entered in, and I'm just going to leave the decimals as they are, and then I'm going to come over here to data view, and I'm going to expand these columns so that it's easier to read, and I'm going to begin entering the codes that we just discussed for my IVs. So the client woman we're going to code as 1, and it looks like the first 10 clients are all women, so I'm just going to code the first 10 with a 1, and then the second half, or the next 10 clients, so 11 through 20, we're going to code as 2, representing man. So the first 10 will be 1, and then the second 10 will be 2. Here I go. Okay, and then we said that we were going to label the gender for the therapist when it was a woman as 3 and the man as 4. So it looks like the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are women, and then the next 5 are man, the next 5 are women, and the next 5 are man. So again, we're going to do woman as 3 and man as 4. Okay. And then a number of activities for each. I'm just going to enter that in according to the lab assignment. So here I go. Okay, so now I have all that data entered in, and I am ready to begin getting the information I need to complete this block of cells here. So what I'm going to do is go to Analyze, General Linear Model, click Univariate, and then I am going to put the dependent variable as ADL. So I'm going to click on ADL and move it over. And then my two IVs are going to go into this fixed factors box. So I'm just going to highlight them and move them over. And then I'm going to come down here to EM means, which is where I'm going to tell the program here to get all my means for me, my cell means and my marginal means. And then I'm going to move over gender client, gender therapist, and then the interaction gender client by gender therapist into this display means box and click continue. And I'm going to click on options, and I'm going to click on descriptives and estimates of effect size. And I'm going to click continue. And then I'm going to come here to plots. I'm going to put the gender client into the horizontal axis because the gender client is what I'm going to put here on my rows. So I'm going to make that my horizontal axis. And then gender therapist is going to be my columns. So I'm going to put that in the separate lines box. There we go. And then I'm going to click add. And I want my y-axis to start at 0 so I don't make a wow graph. And then I'm going to click continue. And I should have everything I need at this point, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And then, okay, so I'm just going to begin by just labeling this. So lab 7, just somewhere at the top so I don't get confused and I can see it for future reference. And then this is going to be SPSS application 1. So what I have here are my ends for each group. So group 1, which was the client woman, and group 2, which we had coded as the client man, and then therapist 3, so this was the woman therapist, and then therapist 4 was the man therapist. So these are the numbers of participants in each group. And then here is a breakdown of our descriptive statistics, the means for each group and the standard deviations. The cell and the marginal means are actually in here, but I find this particular table to be a little bit tough on the eyes to like parse out information. So we're going to look down here to get the means that we need for this number 3 on our worksheet. Number 1 here where it says client, the means that are given are actually going to be those marginal means or the means outside. So for client 1, that's going to be our first row. So we're going to go ahead and label that and then put the mean in here where it goes. So we're going to have gender of the client. Put that off to the side here. Okay, so my IV is gender of client, and then I have woman, and I have man. And I had coded, I should have done this, man 2, parentheses, and I had coded woman 1. Okay, so I have my IV gender of client, and then woman coded 1, and man coded 2. And then I'm going to have to put my other IV up here. So gender of therapist. And so again, we're going to have woman, but this time it's going to be coded 3. And we're going to have man, and we coded that as 4. Okay, so we have women coded as 1, man coded as 2 under client, and then for the gender of the therapist, women are coded as 3, and men are coded as 4. Okay, so now we can start filling in these values. So for the client that we coded 1, which was woman, the marginal mean, so the value that goes on the outside of the cells, is 17.5. So I'm going to put that here. Okay. And then let's see if we can do client when the client was a man. So that's going to be here on your output 2. And the marginal mean for the clients that are men is going to be 14.5. Okay, and then we're going to do this second IV, our columns, the gender of the therapist. So for the women therapists, or number 3, the marginal mean is 16.5. So I'm going to put that right here. I'm just going to change that to a 6. Okay. And then for the gender of the therapist, man, or number 4, this column here, the marginal mean is 15.5. So 4 is 15.5. So 15.5. Okay, so these first 2 marginal mean boxes are giving us the marginal means, or the values outside of the cell for the rows and the columns. And then down here is our interaction. And the interaction is going to represent all the values inside the cells, or the cell means. So when the client is coded 1, or woman, and the therapist is coded 3, or woman, the mean for that cell is 19. So 1 and 3. So I'm going to come over here, and I have coded 1 and 3 this cell. So this cell is going to be 19. So now I'm going to do, let's see, 1 and 4 on the output is this cell here. The gender of the client is a woman, and the gender of the therapist is a man. So 1 and 4 is going to give me a mean of 16. Put that right here, 16. Okay, and then I have 2 and 3. So the cell for 2 and 3 is right here, this cell here. And that value for 2 and 3 is 14. And then for this last cell, 4 and 2, so 2 and 4 is 15. Okay, so I've completed this, and so I'm going to move on to number 4, which says to use SPSS to determine if the researcher can support their hypothesis. report the statistics in APA format for the main effects and the interaction. So for that, we're going to come back up here to our summary table, and it's a lot, so we're going to have to make it bigger. Okay, so the way we're going to write our statistics in APA format is by using the test symbol, which is F in this case. So I'm going to start by entering an F. And then after the F, we're going to put our degrees of freedom. So I'm going to need parentheses for that. And the degrees of freedom that we're going to use is the DF for main effect A, which is 1. And then our within or error measure. So 1 and 16 are going to be the degrees of freedom I'm using. And then after I put my degrees of freedom in parentheses, I'm going to put the equal sign and then the test value for that main effect. So that is going to be an F value of 45. So I'm going to put 45, comma, and then I need my P value. And that is going to equal, wow, 0.000. Doesn't get better than that. For main effect A, just to be clear, we would be putting reject HOP less than 0.01. So for main effect B, which is going to be gender therapist, we're going to use 1 degree of freedom and then 16, the error or the within. So it's going to be the same as A. And then the test value itself for gender therapist or main effect B is 5. So I'm going to put that right after the equal sign, 5. And then I have to report the significance level, which is the p-value. And so that says it's significant at 0.04. So for main effect B, I would be rejecting HOP less than 0.05. And then I have to report the interaction statistic. So for the interaction statistic, I'm going to use the degrees of freedom for the interaction, which is 1, and of course the error, which is 16. Okay, so with degrees of freedom of 1 and 16, the interaction, I see it here with the star. So it's showing gender client by gender therapist, the interaction. I have an F value of 20, so I'm going to write that after the first equal sign, and then I have a p-value of 0.00. So for the interaction, I would be able to reject HOP less than 0.01. So now I am going to explain the interaction. I would say there is a significant difference on depression measured by ADL depending on the gender of the therapist and the gender of the client. So those two variables worked together, they interacted, and they did produce an effect on depression or number of daily activities that were done. So then the next thing that you are going to do is graph the interaction and insert it below. So we've already done that when we told the computer to plot, and you can clearly see that the lines are interacting, and you can see that we had set our base of our ordinate at 0, and there it is. The therapist is represented in blue for woman, and the male therapist or the man therapist is represented in red here. And then the woman client and man client represented down here, 1 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to screenshot this. And I am just going to insert it into my PDF here by going to view thumbnails. I'm just going to grab that screenshot I just took and I'm going to put it right there. And there it is. And that is how you do a Factorial ANOVA. So you can go ahead and do the next one on your own. And that's it for Lab 7. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.